Can you go back in, bro?
Okay, so this is basically reason, author. Wait.
That's a medical district. It's other ones. It's
Okay, see the bird? Go.
Not too far away, is it?
Y el muro puro cemento. Sin...
So there I was, reading my little book, drinking my little drink, thinking my little thoughts, when I realized, oh no, I haven't talked about books in a long time. That's okay, I'll just make a video about it. How many could it possibly be? Hey, I just shattered the world record for most books read ever. Hold your applause. Well, thank you. Okay. Standing ovation is too far though. Y'all should sit down. I wanted to do a little victory lap and talk about the last few reads that propelled me into stardom and broke the gold medal. I'm about to be so annoying in this video. I'm sorry. Y'all, I read 25 books last month. That is crazy. I owe it all to this shirt, really. If I wasn't wearing Sunny's merchandise, would I have read that many books? Probably not. And it's so true. I mean, look how cute this is. I'm in heaven right now. Alright, so I figured the fastest way to get through this many books at once is gonna be a tier list. I have not made the tier list. A tier list. Okay, let's try and get started. Hey again, I never bring up what books I'm about to rank, so here are the titles. Among Flowers by Jamaica Kincaid, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga, Miss Ice Sandwich by Miyako Kawakami, In Love by Alfred Hayes, Kitchen, Banana Yoshimoto, The Body in the Library, Agatha Christie, 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair, Pablo Neruda, The Lover, Margaritura, Moonlight Shadow, Banana Yoshimoto, Open Water, Caleb Azuma Nelson, Murder on the Orient Express, and The Pale Horse, both by Christie, Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo, Permafrost by Eva Baltasar, Autobiography of Red, Anne Carson, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, Ross Gay, Temporary by Hilary Lecter, The Hole by Hiroko Oyamada, Upstream by Mary Oliver, White on White by Aisha Gul Savas, Memories of My Melancholy Horrors by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The English Understand Wool by Helen DeWitt, and YN by Esther Yee. That's a lot of books. This is going to be a long video, but enjoy. Okay, so starting in chronological order is a book I forgot to talk about a few months ago, which is White on White. I read this in January, so some of the details are already escaping me, but from what I remember, didn't really love this one. It didn't make a lasting impression, at least. It's about this student who moves into this apartment with this older woman who's a painter, and her husband is also a painter, like an academic. He's like renowned in the industry basically, so it's like this strange power dynamic that they have going on, and it's also very much about art and her studying art and like relationships to the self and objects of desire, and this weird little like triangle that they have going on of like admiration and also observation. A lot of the story, from what I remember, is told through the stories that the woman tells, like the older woman who she's sharing an apartment with. And that level of like disconnect, the chain of information, made it really weird, where you're hearing them through the perspective of the student girl who is living there. So it's like these secondhand recountings of firsthand events. It just got messy for some reason in my head, where I would rather the book have just been from the perspective of the older woman, so you could get her interiority instead of just interpreting it through the eyes of this lady. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, I'm not going to keep talking about it. Didn't really love this one, and that's okay. Even though that's a bit of a hot take out the gate, because I know a lot of people really like this one. I am not of that ilk. Another book I did not like is, I'm already not going chronologically, oops, is Among Flowers by Jamaica Kincaid. I read this last month for, yeah, these are all from last month. I read this last month for Katie James's book club, and we all kind of were unanimous in that it could have been better. Well, not unanimous. One person did like it, but I did not, so I'm not gonna bother defending it, sorry. Yeah, I feel like it was just limited by its structure. This is a travel memoir that Kincaid writes about a trip to the Himalayas to collect seeds for her garden. And there's some interesting ideas presented, but I don't think that they were really explored that well. Ideas about like class specifically and going there to collect something and take it back, kind of like colonialization. And that is an interesting concept, especially for like a travel memoir. Turns out travel memoir does not really lend itself to interior thoughts. And so if you only recount what happened during the trip and then not what you were thinking during the trip, doesn't make for that interesting of a book, especially if you're not actively exploring the ideas that you're presenting. It just felt like there were a lot of glimpses of things that had a lot of potential and then it just doesn't go anywhere. Let's see. What else have I art thou read? I read In Love by Alfred Hayes. Oh my god, this book was so good. I remember picking books for, this was like around the time of my trip to Japan, and picking books by like the blurb on the back. This one said like Miles Davis songs and Hopper paintings and noir, and I was like, okay, I'm sold, and it did not disappoint. So good and sultry and like cigarette smoky, ashy, loungy nightclub. It's just the relationship between these two people falling out basically cataclysmically, and then recounting it to someone else one night at a bar. Super reflective, super melancholic, but the writing, something about it is just so striking. I really don't know how to describe or like convey how much I enjoyed this book, which I probably shouldn't because it is bordering on like male manipulator, because you're reading it from the perspective of this guy who is borderline delusional, which I really enjoyed because that is a part of relationships, that there's like a blindness attached to being so obsessed and so devoted to the idea of someone, not even the person themselves, but yeah, the kind of loss of faculties that go along with being in love is conveyed really well in this. Another book I read was Temporary. This book is super absurd and surreal and very fast-paced and comedic, which are all things that are pretty hit or miss, and I'm happy to report that this book was entertaining, enjoyable. It hit the mark. It never felt like cloyingly anything. It was just really palatable and fun to read. It reminds me a lot of Tatami Galaxy, so if y'all are into that or know what that is, it's essentially the story of this world where there's temps and then there's permanents, and so the temps just go from job to job trying to find a place where they stick, and it is about our protagonist going from job to job, different casts of characters that just come and go like as if it's a stage play. The curtain goes up, something happens, it goes away, and we're immediately on to the next thing. Funny and offbeat. Good book. Another good book is Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. I went on a bit of a Christie kick this last month where I opened the door and then I was like, oh, I've been missing out a lot. So I read 4 Christies. Let me find them all. Okay, I read And Then There Were None. I read Murder on the Orient Express, The Body in the Library, and then The Pale Horse. All varying degrees of good, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I mean, some of them were good, and I'm happy about that. I have a recurring complaint for all of them, which is that they end kind of inconsequentially. Regardless of how good the build-up is, it ends up just kind of fading out, and then just the book ends. And it's not always super satisfying. I'd say some are better than others. Like, I think And Then There Were None has a solid ending where there's still that sense of whodunit right up until you're turning the last page. And Murder on the Orient Express is one that I really like the build up, and then it just kind of crumbles and disintegrates between your hands and you go, oh, okay. But that is nothing compared to these last two. I just really did not like the endings to these. The Body in the Library specifically, because I didn't really like the build up to it either. It should not be called a Miss Marple book. I was excited to meet Miss Marple. I was looking forward to seeing, what differences they had in character. She doesn't damn show up to like the last 3 chapters, and then she just solves the mystery by guessing, basically, which they all do. I'm gonna be honest. Christy, go to hell, because some of this is so annoying. I really like to get invested. I'm trying to solve it the whole damn time, and then it always ends up being something that you just could not have known. Even if I'm taking notes, she's just like, "Oh, but you should have known that he was born with the cleft chin and on a Tuesday. So actually, his third eyelash is longer. So actually, yeah, go fuck yourself." The Pale Horse was like a cult and spooky, and I really liked the premise until it got to the part where it started solving itself and piecing together, and then it stopped being sort of ambiguous and scary, and it started just being kind of silly and disappointing. Murder on the Orient Express was fun, but the ending again just felt super inconsequential. Although out of the 3 characters that I'd read, I did like him the most. Hercule. I cannot say his last name. I don't know how. But And Then There Were None was the best. Although I probably wouldn't put it in A tier, to be honest. So maybe something like this looks good to me. Okay, 2 more books I read that were not directly connected, but kind of connected are The Lover and then Memories of My Melancholy Whores. These books follow very, very similar themes. I didn't realize that they were so close to one another until I started the second one. I was like, oh, it's this again. Essentially, the premise of both is this illegal and like pedophilic relationship between a very young girl and then an older man, but they're told from completely different perspectives. So The Lover follows the perspective of this girl who gets to a certain point where she has to make a decision for herself of like crossing this threshold into this man's house, knowing that she won't be able to leave it back to her family, and the emotional weight of her decisions. It's a lot of her reflecting on her family life. It's also not super chronological, so there's aspects of her like as an adult looking back, or like different aspects of her family history. And the further in that you go, the more like emotionally gut-wrenching this relationship that she's having becomes, even though she doesn't view it as flawed. It's just really layered. The writing is really good. I really enjoyed like the structure and everything that this one had going on. This book, on the other hand, is told from the perspective of a 90-year-old man who wants to have himself a virgin on his 91st birthday or something. I don't remember. Yeah, I didn't want to read all that, I'm gonna be honest. Technically it's not as bad as it sounds. He doesn't actually have a sexual relationship, although he does develop romantic feelings, and then he has to grapple with wanting not to defile her, and then also protecting her while also like not giving in. There's like a whole lot of shit going on. Didn't like it. Did not like it. Pretty gross, won't lie. I mean, they were both gross, but one is like presented in a way that is a lot more like reverent and less weird. Whatever, it's a lost cause. I also read Open Water, which was very internal. This was a very like fucked up book. It's told in second person, so it's told like you instead of I, and that definitely coaxes you into connecting with the book for better or worse. And it works. I mean, it cheats, because how can you're like hypnotizing yourself while reading. You're like, you walk over here, you see them, you feel this, and it's like, damn, do I? Maybe I do. It's cute because it is a romance at its core, and you get to see these 2 characters like come together and sort of try and deny and hesitate about like what they feel, and eventually it's impossible to keep up that charade, and then you have to deal with the repercussions of what you decide to do, of like the build up towards a relationship, or the build up towards emotions, like the sort of like amorphous, like ephemeral, like feelings and fears and hesitations that come like leading up to a commitment, like facing the door towards something and then getting cold feet and being afraid of being vulnerable, of depending on another person, of nurturing, of denying, of being intimate. And it depicts it all really tenderly. There's like a musical through line to it all. There's a lot of music references like to specific songs, but also relating emotions through like a musical lens, like motion and rhythm, like having feelings ebb and flow, and dancing with another person It cites NW by Zadie Smith as a key influence, and it definitely has similar energy. I loved NW, so guilty pleasure. I did really enjoy this. Yeah, thank you to Noor for convincing me to read it. I had it on my radar for a while. I know Iggy also really likes this book, but yeah, Noor talked about it in one of their recent videos and had to check it out, and I'm glad I did. Another book that I read around the same time was In the Dream House, which is really awesome, bears. Okay, so In the Dream House is also told in second person, so you instead of I, and that gives it a lot of layers. Not only is there like a level of distance and involving yourself in someone else's life story, making it feel more fictitious, more like distance from just like an info dump of this is my life, this is what happened. It's also presented in a way or structured in a way where it's every point that she wants to get across is veiled through a metaphor about this sort of dream house and the different aspects of it, whether it's like through pop culture or queer theory or like gender studies or her own upbringing and like a religious aspect. There's a lot of distance that she is able to hide behind, and I don't mean that negatively. I just mean that there's a lot of safety in the way that it's presented in terms of being able to be very vulnerable and like share like explicit or like very powerful moments in her life without being fully exposed and like overly vulnerable, because there's a layer that you have to go through in order to understand it. I don't know if that fully made sense. I'm sorry if it doesn't. Overall, I just feel like this was really clever, really urgent, and honestly like hair raising. Like the recounting of an abusive relationship is disturbing on a lot of levels, and I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to this in some way. And so reading this definitely gives you goosebumps because some of it is not unfamiliar, and that is super disturbing, to be quite frank. But it just goes to show how like universal or unifying this message can be, and how this sort of personal triumph can still relate to you, even more obviously by the fact that it's told from your perspective. Yeah, just a really good book. I really, really enjoyed this one. I think it's super clever. Okay, another book that I read and loved. Jaren was right. If an Egyptian cannot speak English, is that book. This was so it was so good. Honestly, it was very overwhelming for me to get through, but on the other side, I appreciate a lot of it. It was juggling a lot of concepts, a lot of things at once, and it took in all of my attention while I read it. At a certain point, I would close it for the night and then just keep thinking about it until I picked it back up again, because I was like, I can't stop. And during work, it'd be the same thing. I would just be like, I can't wait till I'm off so I can read this damn book. Yeah, it was consuming me, but it's been a while since a book has had me like that. And I really, really enjoyed being that excited to read. So it deals with large themes, but it never feels dense or lectury. It'll start every chapter by posing a question and then answering it kind of vaguely or metaphorically, sometimes by asking another question, but it is super, super cool. It's told in like alternating perspectives of each chapter and has to do with a lot with duplicity and mirroring of one another. It's about these two Egyptians, one that's native to Cairo and then one that is from there originally or immigrating back from America. So they're like westernized, and they form this bond, this friendship, and then prospective romance. But you see them kind of learn and understand each other from very different places, and the differences are very thought-provoking because it's a very introspective book. Like literally it does ask a lot of questions and encourage you to think along with it, but it has to do with what changes once you leave somewhere, who you are once you come back, obviously in the sense of immigration, but also beyond that, just in race politics, in general politics, identity politics. It's a very political book, I would say, but it is written so beautifully, like so beautifully and so intimately. There's a lot of interplay between like very tender and like delicate ideas about sexism and ethnicity and what people deserve, or what the characters think people deserve, who deserves each other, what you think as a reader, and then also it's very modernized, so there's a lot of commentary about the protection that oppression can provide, at least from like an American lens of like hyper woke leftist, where being oppressed is like a safety net that like shields you from a lot of criticism in certain ways. All of this is packaged super uniquely, super well. It's, oh my god, it's so good. This book is, whew, yeah, no, it is so good. Duran, thank you for introducing this. This is, oh my god, it's so good. Okay, around this time, I went on a bit of a hot streak book-wise. Also, let me turn on a light. Hold up. Okay, as I was saying, I went on a bit of a hot streak reading-wise where I picked up a lot of really good books back to back, and I am amazed that I'm still able to like books after the things I read. Starting with Upstream by Mary Oliver. God, you just God, God. I mean, what can I really say? I feel like everyone adores this book. It's been talked about to death. Mary Oliver is a very tender and intimate and lovely poet, and her writing essays that have to do with not only nature, but just kind of interiority, spirituality, the pursuit of being creative, the pursuit to not only nature, but yourselves inside of sort of blending the boundaries between yourself and your surroundings, and a lot of like advocating for yourself. This book was very inspiring in terms of just a call to action to exist and sort of realizing the limitations that you put on yourself without really meaning to. Yeah, just beautiful all around the board. I remember reading this at a lake and then hearing her or like reading her say something about whimsy and then being like, oh, I could do that, and then just throwing the book aside and like swimming out into the middle. I was in my little romanticizing bag, so whatever. That probably sounds so kitschy, but I really liked this book and the way it made me feel. I barely annotate, but I was highlighting left and right. I was passing the book around to my friends so that they could read it. I also read the Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. If you don't know, Ross Gay is incredible. The Book of Delights, literally life-changing. And this was also very, very good. I liked it less, but that is not to diminish how good this is. God, it is just, he and Mary Oliver, king and queen of romanticizing your own life. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Overall, I didn't feel it was super consistent. Like some of it landed further than others, but the poems or like the little like vignettes that landed, yeah, they made me cry, like ugly cry, call my loved ones, and like, yeah, I was ready to advocate for a lot of people. Yeah, God, Ross Gay is so good. I have what is it called? Inciting Joy there in the ether of my floor pile. I'm so excited to read that. I have to save it though, because I cannot go through all of his catalog at once. So I will read that eventually. I'm so excited. I also read, sorry, pause. I read Pedro Paramo, which is this Spanish surrealist story about a young boy who is going to this ghost town for the sake of his dead mother to meet his father and ask for what he's owed. And it is steeped in these very, very dense like clouds that even go so far like as to confuse the page, where all of the white space in this book is essentially just a complete perspective shift with no warning. Half of the book is trying to figure out who's talking, because there's a lot of dialogue between characters and it only refers to them as like I, or it'll slowly like name whoever they're talking to, and you piece together the members of this town, which may or may not still exist. It's like very ephemeral and like steeped in like people who are also just shadows of themselves, but they're staying there out of like this obligation or this sense of duty, this debt that they may owe. Like it's very layered, it's very dense, it's very trippy in terms of like being hard to wrap your head around, and At points, it was very, very difficult because there's like a good chunk in the middle where it's like I cannot tell what is happening. But by the end, I do think that it all comes together really nicely and even subverts my expectations of what I thought was going to happen. Yeah, thumbs up. I also read The Hole, which, again, is a surrealist book. This one, though, fell very flat for me. I didn't have like super high expectations going in. I thought the cover was gorgeous, and so I was like, I'll buy it. I read it in like one sitting. Didn't really connect to it very much. It's about this woman who moves out to this more rural part of town, and she falls into a hole, and from there a lot of surreal and sort of creepy events start taking place that she's trying to make sense of. There's like a level of like separation from family. It just didn't really do anything, was my problem, where there's like a level of like unease that is set among the town, and then there's never like a spike or like a climax and like conflict of, oh my god, something creepy is actually happening. It's more like, this book is creepy, and then it just kind of ends. Yeah, like half the book I would say like nothing happens, and for a book that is so short, I feel like you can't really afford to like set up that much exposition and then not go anywhere with it. Didn't like it. After The Hole, I read Miss Ice Sandwich, also in one sitting, because these are both really skinny books. They're like both like 100 pages ish. And so yeah, I read Miss Ice Sandwich, which is the fourth Kawakami that I have read. I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would. For how hideous this cover is, it's not that bad. It has a lot of Kawakami isms in terms of things being very ephemeral, child perspectives. This one is like elementary schoolers, and the distance and sort of feeling that they have towards life while they're dealing with these strained family dynamics. It's these two elementary schoolers who are forming their own like friendship and like sacred little bond between themselves of like trusting each other enough to ask questions, open up, like share themselves with. And one of them gets this sort of obsession with a worker in a grocery store that they frequent. I think like the key, like, or the centerpiece of it is like the family dynamics, which is really clever. I really like this book. I thought it was good. I am pleasantly surprised by it. I think also, having come off a book that I didn't enjoy, I was just more receptive to it. It probably looks weird among these like established books, but I mean, Kawakami's writing is really good, and I will not apologize. Let's see. Later that night, I remember I read 4 books in a day. I read Whole, Ice Sandwich. Oh, I read Permafrost also. Wait, these must not have all been in the same day. Okay, regardless, these all were very, very close after another. Permafrost was really good. It was like really like too relatable almost. It's about this queer woman who just graduated university and is wanting to spend as much time as possible in the in-between chapters of her life, where she's just kind of drifting about between being in education and being in a career, and she just wants to spend it doing nothing and just being in relationships and reading books. Yeah, I connected to it a lot. It is so good. It deals with like a lot of different concepts, or not even concepts, but like the themes change so fast, like one after the other, and it is just really, really enjoyable. I knew that it had a lot of praise, and I did not feel disappointed at all. I finished it so fast, like I ate it up. Really enjoyed it. Like really, really enjoyed it. Sometimes I don't even know what to say. Like, it was good, and that's that. And that's that. 20 love poems and a song of despair. This is like the bilingual edition. It was my first time reading poetry in Spanish. So sick. Like, that was super awesome. Reading it in Spanish did something where I don't know if it's just a more like romantic language, like in a literal sense, or something about like the emotive or like the amorphous, or the connection I have to the words themselves, or something about it just clicked. Also, maybe Naruto is just a great poet, but regardless of what it was, I really liked it, and I want to read more poetry in Spanish going forward. This is The English Understand Wool by Helen DeWitt, which is one of those like big storybooks. I have it. I'm not going to grab it. I'm lazy. A lot of buzz. I know Jalen put it in his top 10, and I know Nathan also read it recently. everyone has been getting their hands on these little storybook editions, and so I said, well, I'm not gonna be left out. It's a shorty, it's a skinny, it's like 70 pages, and I was pleasantly surprised as well on this. I definitely liked it more than Miss Ice Sandwich, but okay, B is getting a little crowded. I might need to reorganize. Regardless, this book is Imagine if Trust was a novella and didn't have nearly as much exposition, but still plays with form, like in terms of like the reader is a character and the way that they present information is meant to like subvert whatever you're expecting in a really fun way. There's like not like a sense of like unreliability, but like a sense of like disconnect between like a very apathetic main character, like narrator. It's just really clever. Like the more that you read, the more that it's 70 pages, y'all. Just read the book. I'm not gonna tell you what happens in it. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. Then this weekend, while I was in Mexico, I read 3 books because there was a lot of plane rides and waiting rooms, a whole lot of stuff. So Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto was really, really fun. I knew nothing going into it, and my expectations were pretty high, to be honest, because Yoshimoto's other book that I'd read was one of my favorites last year, so I was like, this has got to be good. I know a lot of people claim, or not even claim, a lot of people do love it, and so I was very excited going in, and it didn't disappoint at all. It deals a lot with grief and kind of like the after effects of loss and also of love in certain aspects, but the cool part of this, to me at least, was how sparse it is, how much like negative space there is. There's a lot of gaps between like context of one chapter to the next, or like one aspect of the story to the next, where it only focuses on the lulls between these sort of like peaks in action, where you come into the book right after like a major life event has happened and you sort of see the character like unravel afterwards, and then there's, you know, new characters introduced, there's new relationships formed, and then another big passage of time is like omitted and you're in the aftermath of whatever happened. I'm being really vague, but it's super short. I don't like give away anything. Filling in the gaps of what happened retrospectively and having the characters live life off screen or like off page, I don't know what to say, makes the characters feel more fleshed out and have issues that don't get addressed directly. It's like tender, it's intimate, it's like reflective, but it's not plotty. I guess like, yeah, no plot, just vibes, I guess. It was just really, really good. I liked the structure of it being that open, of it being that sort of vague, and it just made the story center more around the emotions of the characters than their actions themselves. Although there are still some very tender, you know, displays of affection in this that made my heart ring out. And in the copy of Kitchen that I read, there's also a novella at the end. It's like 50 pages, 40 pages. It's pretty short, but it deals with similar like themes of grief and loss and trying to kind of reconcile with a big gap within yourself of a final goodbye being enough to, you know, move on in terms of their spirit calming and then you also, you know, reconciling with whatever emotions you were facing. Doesn't work nearly as well in my opinion, but it wasn't bad. I am having to think because I feel like it was on par with Miss Ice Sandwich in terms of it being like sparse, not like super impactful, but not bad per se. Although I don't want it to be in the same tier list as White on White or Whole. I will add another tier list. Yeah, I gotta move some of these further down. I'll wait until the end to move those. I don't really know. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh yeah, same themes, just less exposition, less character development. This one felt more like a Murakami like D side. Yeah, that's fine. Then I read Autobiography of Red, which I am sorry to the booktube darlings of this and White on White that I am just not connecting to. But something about this, I don't know if I'm being cynical or like being bitter or looking for a reason to dislike it, because I've liked other books that are similar to it in theme before, but something about this just really, I don't know, like rubbed me the wrong way almost. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts about this one, and it's not even super about the book specifically. It's more like the theme of portraying abuse in like these queer stories over and over, and how I'm kind of just over it, I think. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, specifically since finishing A Little Life. And in the weeks after that I was kind of out of the immediate experience of like being overwhelmed and like consumed by that book, the more I was like, how's this really sitting with me? And what was really the point? And like, how intrinsic is suffering or like abuse to the queer experience, whether it's like internalized or external? But can you really portray queerness without representing that sort of sense of otherness? And stories like this have been bothering me more and more, where it is just a queer youth who is bright-eyed and unassuming, being abused and hurt by those around him, and then spends their entire life flinching for why. And then the book just ends randomly without a resolution or without like a larger message, and then the reaction that you have is supposed to be construed as some sort of like emotional reckoning, when you're really not doing anything. You're just kind of pointing at something and being like, this sucks, and then not elaborating or not, I don't know. I just don't think I want to read more things like that. Yeah, and the whole like Greek spin on it also did not land with me like at all. The only thing that mattered was the names, that they were named Jairon and Heracles or whatever. You could have them be named George and Harold, and this shit would hit the exact same. You don't need to have them be like a big red monster to like have a trans allegory. This is already like super modernized. It's contrived, it's played out, it goes nowhere, it ends abruptly. Thumbs down all across the board. Again, not even specifically this book. I just think I'm over the whole genre of like misery porn surrounding like gay characters. Okay, I'm done talking about it. And the last book that I'm technically not done with, but I will address, is White N by Esther Yee. This book is freaking awesome, bears. I am really liking it. Let me check how many pages left. It is so good. I'm really, really enjoying it. It is like an intersection of a lot of really cool things, of like the uncanniness of Paradise Rot. It reminds me a lot of movies in the sense that it's like very cinematic and has like that sort of weird nightlife that can only sort of exist on screen, of these late night Euro dating couple that like are in concrete buildings, like weird parties where you run into it's like a whole thing. There's a certain vibe that I can't put into words, but it just keeps spiraling out of control, and has to do a lot with obsession and this sort of mirrored storyline between this woman who is obsessed with a pop idol and starts writing fan fiction that sort of mirrors her own life, and then the line blurring between the two. Not so much that it becomes like an unreliable narrator, because it is not unreliable at all. They're just unstable. And so you're getting like a very clear recounting of someone who is unwell, and that sort of makes it feel unnerving. Think Perfect Blue if Mina and the stalker were the same person, where there's like a double life that's being lived, and then there's also someone who is like very unhealthily obsessed with someone else and is going to like extreme lengths in order to find them. Blend all of that with this like sense of unease, with this really vivid and lush writing that I am adoring. It is so super good. And a lot of surrealism, where the borders between reality and dream and like obsession and delusion are all blending. Like I said, I'm not done with it, but if this sticks to landing, I mean, it's a no-brainer. For now, from what I've read, I will tentatively put it in A tier, but I'm gonna be honest, this shit slaps so hard. I don't care how it ends. It's S tier. It's so good. Okay, that is my tier list. Those are the 25 books I read in March, one in January. I will do some last minute rearranging. Kitchen definitely goes higher. Damn, this is a stacked lineup. I read some good ass books. Yeah, that looks right to me. Okay, so yeah, this is my tier list of books that I read in March. Thanks for watching. I'm sure that this was very rambly and kind of incoherent, but I would rather have my thoughts be out there and be kind of messy than sit on them for another, I don't know how many months, because making these videos gets pretty daunting the more books I have to talk about. So 25 is a lot. So I'm just glad that this is behind me. Even though I'm aware that like I did not get everything across super eloquently, I'm sure I will never regret anything I said today or change my mind. So, okay, bye. See y'all later.